What's up, y'all? I thought I would do my experiment recaps on YouTube this week. I usually do them on Instagram, but it's easier for me to do them on YouTube. So I'm going to try to do them, and I'm going to try to do this one really fast because the power keeps going out here. And I think that we can do this in maybe 5 minutes. So if you know me, you know that I run a lot of different tests in my business and that I'm a huge proponent of experimenting with a lot of things in your business, most importantly, marketing and sales. And so I run a lot of tests in my business and I do little experiment recaps at the end of every week. I've been using this thing called MakerLog to do my experiment recaps. You can find some of the other ones in here, but I moved back into Trello recently. It's more visual. It's easier to see and track experiments in flight week to week. Not every experiment is just contained within 1 week. Many are, but not all are. So Trello makes it easier for me to carry experiments over week to week. And so I'm going to run down the experiments that I ran this week and experiments that are in flight, including this week. Just to walk you through the board and how it's set up, I've got experiments I'm considering running and still formulating, experiments I've actively been running or will run for a little bit of time, experiments I'm analyzing, experiments that won, experiments that lost, and experiments that are inconclusive, meaning I can't tell, did it win or did it lose? And then I also have experiments that I shelved, which are experiments that maybe didn't have a clear outcome and I might want to come back to. So the main difference between these two is the shelved ones are maybe I pulled the plug on it too early, or I didn't even bother analyzing it and I need to come back and reshape that test. So I'm going to go through the ones I ran this week. So the big one this week, if you've been watching my YouTube channel, was the Growth Gym. That's my new live stream that I'm doing Fridays in July. So I'm going to do that 3 times in July. I did it yesterday. I'm going to do it next week and the week after that. And then I'm going to analyze the results. The overall goal there is being able to convert people from the live stream into growth trackers, into my membership. So the thinking behind the Growth Gym is that people have a really hard time understanding what we do inside growth trackers, and we can give them a little taste of that on a live YouTube, live LinkedIn, so that they can get a sense of what we're doing inside growth trackers and how growth trackers helps everybody find their stay booked formula. So the signal off of the live stream is people joining the growth trackers waitlist. Obviously, it's great to have people watching. That makes it more valuable for everybody. So on yesterday's live, I had 7 folks on YouTube, 6 on LinkedIn, with an average of 4 or 5 viewers at one time. And then I got 2 new people on the wait list. It's a little hard to tell. This should say from live, if this is from the live or from something else. And one of them I think might be from something else. I'm going to tell you about that later. So this test is still in flight. This will run for 2 more weeks. Every week I do a little recap on my email and my podcast episode and how those perform. So this week's email was off of the podcast episode called 5 Reasons Not to Create a Lead Magnet. That was the subject line. You can see the preview right here. That's what it looked like. It went out to about 700 people. The open rate was below average. So it was 47%, and the click rate was 9.5%. So as a backstory note, my open rate has gone significantly down since I moved over to Beehive from MailerLite. So it used to be consistently above 50%, in the range of 50 to 60%. And now it's hovering around 50%, with maybe 51% being my best open rate on Beehive. So I'm about to run a re-engagement campaign there to see if I can get the open rate up. And that is going to decrease the list a little bit, which is fine. So trying to get that up. I also had an email deliverability issue last week with my domain. If you follow me on Instagram, you know that my website went down on Monday. So that disconnected everything, which just affected this email. Got a few unsubscribes, which is fine. I just track those to make sure that it's a pretty even number, or pretty neutral number. And then the top clicks were the podcast episode and the YouTube, which is great. That's what I want people to click on. And then the Stay Booked roadmap, which is actually all the way down in the footer of that email. So it's interesting that got a few clicks. No purchases though. Okay, so this email lost. That's going in the lost. This one's still running. The podcast episode. So I didn't put any info in here. The podcast goes on Wednesday. I actually already did the metrics in our top charts, if you will. So what I want to know every week with the podcast is like, is this beating other episodes? Like, am I doing the same or better than other episodes? And so the podcast goes out on YouTube and then it gets syndicated to Spotify and Apple. Syndicated, can I say that? Sounds fancy. Okay, so these are the top 5 episodes on YouTube. The number 1 is my review of Senja and my breakdown of Senja, their review platform. Then how I find clients then and now, make email your best friend. Interestingly, the Google Analytics episode from last week is starting to do well. And then what to do if your marketing isn't working. So this week's episode was episode 10. It didn't make it into the top 5 on YouTube. It didn't make it into the top 5 on Spotify, but it did make it into the top 5 on Apple, which is really interesting. I have obviously a pretty small audience there. And it's interesting to see like what hits on YouTube versus on Apple. Some episodes are better for audio than others. So I'm just tracking that week over week. I'm going to archive this card. I just put it in here to remember to talk about it. Okay, these bottom 3 are longer term running tests as well. So I've been running a display ad inside a community called Like Minded Collective. What's up, Will? Thank you. Yeah, the GA episode, I was on the fence about it. It didn't hit well right off the bat, but it's having like a long lead time. So, or like a trail of activity. Okay, so Like Minded Collective is a community that I'm a part of for female founders, and I have a banner ad that sits in the middle of the feed. We started this ad on June 1st, so it's like 45 days in. It was sitting right at the top of the feed. Inbal, who runs Like Minded, called me and was like, let's move it a little bit farther down. I've seen better results there. So now it's like a little bit into the feed. So she was thinking people might be scrolling past that top ad. That move has not yielded any additional visits. It's gotten like 6 unique clicks the entire time it's been up. So her other pitch to me was to change out this creative for an episode specific creative, specifically last week's podcast episode. So I owe her that creative and we're going to run that for a few weeks. We'll see if that does better. Okay, I've been sponsoring the Freelance Writing Coach podcast. And so that is like a season-long sponsorship. And the hope there is to convert one of those people into members. It's a little bit of a long path. And I've been experimenting a lot on podcast stuff, not only on my own podcast, but when I podcast guests and when I sponsor podcasts with what's the right call to action. And I've been trying all kinds of calls to action. It looks like I'm still live. Okay, so the power went out, but I'm back. Okay, freelance writing podcast. So I've been doing that all season. They just started their season like in the beginning of July. Thanks, Will. And so it's like an 8-episode season, and I get a shout out in the middle of the episode, or like I think it changes episode to episode with all the sponsors, and then they have a blog where I have like a link on the blog. And so the first week that went out, I got like nothing, but this last week I actually got a lot of traffic. And that must be coming through the blog, through the recaps of that. So that's pretty awesome. And I think, and a 12-minute visit duration on the Growth Trackers page, which is really high. And based on who joined the waitlist, I'm thinking that one of the people actually came from this instead of from the Growth Gym. And the other email, I can't really tell. But I always look up who people are based on their domains. Anyway, that will run for the rest of the summer. So we'll see if any of those people convert. The goal there is to just convert one member. And then I think this is the last test I have on here. I'm also sponsoring the Somewhat Useful podcast. This has been going great. This is with Will and Christy Myers, and I'm doing a sponsorship on my podcast for them, which you might have heard. This is the same language that I'm using on the other podcast. And this is less measurable because I don't have a click attribution on this. So I'll be able to know this if people use the code when doors open. And I have high confidence about this one because I already get great referrals from Christy. So I'm really excited about this. I love that podcast. And that's it for what's going on right now. I'm not going to move any of these because these are all still being tracked. I have some other things I'm thinking about in terms of, I have a newsletter partnership coming up. I have a couple others in here that didn't go so well, mostly because of the call to action or the audience for those. And so a lot of lessons learned there. And then I'm really thinking about how I can revamp my referral and affiliate program. So that's what's on deck for this week, as well as a new podcast episode, another iteration of the Growth Gym, and swapping out this banner ad So we'll see where I get to next week. I'll be back on to do next week's experiment recap. Thanks for joining me. Appreciate it. And let me know if you have questions about any of the metrics, or if you don't buy any of the way that I'm doing these experiments. I'm always game to hear other ways to do this and other ways to think about experiment backlogs. It's something that we are working on inside Growth Trackers, how to best prioritize and recap experiments. So until next time, this has been the Experiment Recap, week ending July 14th.